Okay. Hello, everybody. It's me, Crazy Girl Sammy, and I have a special guest tonight.
Hello, I'm Mickey.
Yes. She's been my friend for like 13 years, so. We have some scary stories for you guys, both off the same website, but totally different stories. So the first one that I have, it's a very long one, so I apologize if you don't like how I talk. It's not my problem. But it's called The Figure in Dark Robes. And these are true stories, guys. So, yeah. It says, I've told this to a select few, and while creepiest, scariest is subjective in the context of my life, it truly is the creepiest and scariest unsolved mystery. I was a freshman in high school in my hometown of La Crosse, Wisconsin. I was sleeping over at my friend Tom's house. We were watching a movie in his living room when he suddenly got a phone call. I watched as he listened to what was being said on the other line. I watched as emotion poured over his face as he threw the phone across the room. After moments of crying, he told me that a boy at my school had committed suicide. Now, I knew this boy only through seeing him in the halls. My friend Tom and I didn't go to the same high school, but Tom had gone to middle school with this boy. Apparently, Tom bullied him during those years. He wasn't proud of it, and to be honest, I was pretty surprised because he was a great guy. He had utter remorse. We decided to sneak out and go for a walk. The year was roughly 1990, maybe 1991. We were freshmen in high school. Now, sneaking out was nothing new. We always did it. At the time, we weren't into drugs, alcohol, or partying. We just liked the freedom of walking the streets at night. The discussions were always great. Normally, we would walk through the big cemetery that was near my house. It was behind the train tracks that still run through La Crosse to this day. We loved the danger of the cemetery, the scares. We were kids. It was a rite of passage. As we walked along the train tracks leading to the cemetery, we stopped. To this day, I can't explain why. We had walked into that cemetery dozens of times and on scarier nights. For whatever reason, we didn't want to go in there. I don't know if the thought of death on our minds due to my classmate's suicide was a factor. Perhaps. Regardless, without really saying anything to each other, we stopped, turned around, and decided to head down a nearby street. Now, in retrospect, I do have to say, throughout this walk, things seemed off. There wasn't a car in sight. This was suburbia. Even walking through the town's main street was odd because there just weren't any cars. Odd. It was roughly after midnight. It was a weekend night. Where was everybody? Perhaps just a strange coincidence. Lastly, there was something in the air. Both Tom and I felt it. We even brought it up. Feels weird tonight. The air, the lights. So we decided to walk down a dead-end street. At the end of the street was a ditch with a simple up, down, and up trail that led to the street that I lived on. Simple enough. Keep in mind, as I get into the horrifying part of this story, that we were in the suburbs. These weren't old, creepy houses with strange individuals, and the trees were small. It wasn't a brand new development, but it wasn't that old either. So as Tom and I were walking down the street, we're looking down to the road beneath our feet as we talk. I don't remember the exact conversation at this particular moment. Perhaps we were talking about the tragedy of that night, but it could just have easily been about Star Wars or Akira. As we approached the dead end, which was a few houses away, Tom and I suddenly stopped. We did so at the same time without saying one word to each other. Our heads slowly turned towards each other, both sensing something, the hair on our arms and back of our necks standing high. Then our gaze slowly moved forward in unison, slightly to the right. That's when we saw it. About 2 houses away, in a virtually barren front yard of a suburban home, besides some bushes, was a dark figure. It was someone or something in dark robes. No face, no features at all, just the robe. Now, this figure didn't acknowledge us. Not yet. It instead walked or moved in a certain way. I can't articulate it correctly, as if it was walking in circles slowly without really walking. It held something that was blowing in the wind, and yes, the wind picked up a little bit as well. Another odd element was the light that illuminated it somewhat. There was a street light a few houses up, but it wasn't strong enough to illuminate this figure as it was. Tom and I were frozen. In fact, I'm almost frozen as I write this. It's been a while since I have thought about this night, so there we stood, frozen in fear, staring at this dark figure moving, yet doing so without moving. And it was holding something, or perhaps what was blowing in the wind was more of its robe. I'm not sure. We stared at this thing for I don't know how long, until it stopped and suddenly looked up at us, as if oh my gosh, as if finally alarmed by our presence. That was enough for us. We ran away as fast as we could. We cut through a side street that was that was to lead us to a parallel street towards my neighborhood. The street led to a slight hill as we rounded the corner and started running up the hill in a panic. We stopped because on top of that hill we saw another dark figure with its arms raised, turned around and ran away in the direction of Tom's house, which at this distance was at least 5 miles away. We ran. Time stood still. The next thing I remember, we're lying in the middle of a courtyard of some other neighborhood that we'd never been in, gasping for breath. We sat up and without saying a word, we walked in silence back to his house. The air felt normal again, although we felt like we were in a haze of sorts, albeit out of danger. We fell asleep in his house. I woke up that morning and went home. A few days later, I rode my bike to the location. Perhaps it was shadow play. Perhaps there was a certain tree or bush or maybe a for sale sign or something that made it look like there was something else there. Nothing. It was an open yard. Tom and I didn't speak of that night for a long time. Years later, when I brought it up, he replied, "Yeah, what the hell was that?" As if no time had passed. What was it? I have no idea. We hadn't taken any drugs. We hadn't been drinking any alcohol. I often wonder if it could have been a haunting, a specter, a ghost, etc. Maybe it was an alien abduction or sighting we saw. No craft, but there was that unexplained light, or maybe it was some other kids messing with us. But how could they have known we were coming? How could they be so prepared? I just don't know. That was roughly 24 years ago, give or take, and yes, this is a true story. Sadly, my best friend Tom passed suddenly a few months ago. I thought of this night during his funeral. I thought of returning to that site. I thought of the odd coincidence of unexpected and surprising death, just like my classmate that night. Is there a connection? Were we seeing some future fate for one of us, which sadly fell upon my best friend Tom? Was this all some dull hallucination? In my mind, no way. It haunts me at times. And that was by Ken Miyamoto. So, that was his story. You're up, buddy.
Okay, I was trying to look for a good one. So, I went to another website because I wanted to see if I could find any for the profession that I'm going into, and found one written by a paramedic. Woman tries to kill herself with an old saw. This one's
oh goodness,
gory. So
yeah, it's fine.
This woman was clearly struggling mentally. She went into her basement and started sawing at her wrists horizontally with a rusty hacksaw. Bleeds a good amount and then starts walking around the house. She wasn't dying quick enough, so she sat down in a chair in the middle of the living room and started going at her wrists again, this time with a pair of scissors.
Oh.
I was the second person inside the house. It looked like a massacre. We searched the house top to bottom, fully expecting to find multiple dead bodies in there. I've never seen so much blood in my life. Every single room had a trail of blood in it. The woman was found on a chair in the living room. Rigor mortis had contorted her body into a really strange, unnatural pose, and her face was haunting. Literally the stuff of nightmares. Her wrists had huge chunks of skin, vein, muscle missing from them. Saying she slit her wrist is inaccurate. She ripped them to pieces.
Oh my goodness. Oh dear. Yeah, that one was... Oh,
yeah.
Don't run into that. You'd be calling me up like, Sam, I need your help. Okay, so my next one that I have, we're doing 5 stories each, and then I'm going to post another video later. Don't know if it'll be tonight, because it's 12:36, but we're going to try. And then I'm uploading this one too. So, okay, this one is called The Little Boy with No Eyes. One night when I was 10, I was asleep in bed and was woken up by my bedroom door opening, then someone sitting on my bed. I felt the graze on my leg and the bed sink as they sat. Thinking it was my mom having something to tell me, I opened my eyes, only to see a pale, eyeless, just black, empty sockets boy, who seemed to be my age, sitting at the foot of my bed with his legs crossed, staring at me, or facing my direction, since he had no eyes. He then reached his hand toward me, and he was holding what looked like a little black box. I was freaked out, but as I reached to grab it, he hesitantly pulled back. I reached out further for it and said, "Give it." As I did so, I blinked, and by the time I reopened my eyes, he was gone. The spot of the bed where he was sitting lifted back into place, but the imprint of someone sitting there was still present. I told my mom in the morning, and she was slightly freaked out, but assured me I was just dreaming. Fast forward to 5 years, I had my girlfriend over to do homework. After homework, she took a nap while she waited for her parents to pick her up. Excuse me. When they arrived, I tried waking her to let her know. I nudged her, and she opened her eyes, so sudden, already looking in the direction of the corner of the room, where the mall, oh my gosh, where the wall meets the ceiling. Lifting her finger and pointed, and as fast as she woke, she fell asleep again. I attempted to wake her again. She came to full consciousness, and I asked her what the hell was that about, and she explained what she just did. She said, "Oh, I thought I was dreaming, but up on the wall I saw a little boy with no eyes just there in a Spider-Man pose, staring at me." That's when I freaked out and told her the story for the first time of when I saw what I guessed was the same kid. Then we're fast forwarding again another 5 years. Still with the same girlfriend, and by this time we had a 2-year-old daughter. Ooh, look at that. We were living in my old bedroom at my parents' house. My daughter would wake up at the same time every night and start talking. For a while we thought it was a normal baby thing, until I noticed it was almost the same conversation every night. I playfully asked her one night who she was talking to every night. She responded, "A little boy. He talks to me. He's nice. He's lost and looking for his mommy." I told my mom what happened the next morning, and before I got to tell her what I thought, she said, "I remember when that happened to you, then your girlfriend. I have no idea what that is." By then, neither my girlfriend or I have seen the little boy after our first encounter, but my daughter continued her nightly conversations until we got our own place later that year. That was by K. Mindo 4. No, thank you. I shall be back.
Okay.
Shaky, shaky. Sorry about that.
All right.
Gotta get water.
This one is called Noises Behind the Door.
Oh.
This actually happened to a friend of mine. She used to live in an entirely different town when she was younger, and her closet had this strange door in the back of it.
Mm.
Well, whether it was imagined just due to her being a child at the time or if it really happened, she started to hear noises coming from behind this door whenever she went to bed. She told me that several times she tried telling her parents that she was hearing these noises, but they never believed her. So some time goes by, and one day her parents get a call from the police because they just arrested a homeless man. This was not just any homeless man, though. This homeless man was living in some sort of tunnel that goes straight to that door in the back of her closet. So every once in a while, for whatever reason, this man would come through that door and watch my friend sleep in her closet. That was, don't even know how to pronounce that.
Rob a dog. 211. I've heard stories about that kind of stuff.
Right.
I'm glad my closet doesn't have a secret door. This one is called The Whispers. This is a story I do not often tell. I promise, sincerely, this has scarred me for life. And although I have looked into psychological explanations for what I heard and natural explanations for what occurred, they remain unsatisfactory. When I was a child, I was scared of the dark. Me too. I'm still scared of the dark.
Me too.
I swore to my mother I heard voices in it. They were not evil, but they were not familiar, and so they scared me. It was not uncommon in the middle of the night for me to wake up and hear whispers, as I could call them, when asking my mom. She figured they were just bumps in the night and typical kids' nightmare material. I tried often to explain to her that it was more than that they sounded different from one another, the way people's voices do. On some nights, I would get so scared from these whispers that I would sleep in my mom's bed with her. It was an added bonus that the bathroom was directly outside of her bedroom door for my late-night tinkles. I should add at this point that when walking out into the hall to go to the bathroom, you look directly down the stairs that would lead you into my living room on the first floor, as my mom's bedroom was on the second floor. On one such night, around Christmas, I awoke and I felt the need to relieve myself. I walked out from the door and distinctly heard the phrase, "Look!" And to my astonishment, a red light, almost like a spotlight, was cast upon the wall at the very bottom of the stairs. I heard this one. The light had no other source. It was by itself, and I was transfixed by it. Being a little kid, and only being a few days from Christmas, I knew what this light was. It was Santa! How else could he get into my house to know I was being a good boy? I was so excited, I began walking down the stairs to greet him, picking up my pace. After the second step, as it began to creep off the wall and fade into the darkness in my living room, that's when I heard him. A very strong, masculine voice. Different from the first. Not at all like my father's. Not to say he isn't masculine. It was just distinctly different. It said, "Stop, right now. Go back up those stairs." I listened. turned around, and what happened next I am not sure I would believe if someone had told me this same story. After reaching the top of the stairs, I heard a very loud crash that sent me running back to my mother's bed, where I jumped straight under the covers and stayed there the whole night. When we awoke the next morning, the poinsettia lights, little Christmas flower lights that glowed red, Mother had put on the railing down the stairs, were pulled straight down to the bottom of the stairs, some broken from what seemed like a forceful tear, laying in a single pile. The dry sink in my living room had fallen from the wall. My mother could not explain it. My father was worried we had been the victims of a home invasion. My sister was crying. There was nothing missing. Nobody had broken in. There did not seem to be any reason this had happened. And then I saw it, and I kept quiet about it because I was so afraid that I could not force words out of my mouth. There, on the edge of the wooden dry sink, which had been facing up, were 3 indentations where the finish on the wood had been worn, almost as if a forceful grip, something down there, had grabbed it and threw it down. That was what the bang was. I was mortified. After that day, I never heard a single voice again. I do not like to imagine what was waiting downstairs for me that night. That was Mom's Day prepper.
It's spooky.
Yeah.
Got another paramedic one.
It's fine.
One call that will always haunt me was on an unresponsive female at around 3 in the morning. We get there and do some pointless CPR along with the fire department. She had been dead for a while, no shock-able rhythm, and clear rigor mortis. The most disturbing part was... Why were they doing that? The most disturbing part was the original caller was her 11-year-old daughter, who had just spent 3 days with her mother's corpse and called 911 because she was lonely. It also didn't help that the victim was completely naked when we arrived.
Oh no.
Wow.
Oh goodness. Was that it? That was short.
Yeah, that one kind of sucked.
I'm sorry, guys. I think I'm allergic to something because
You're allergic to me.
my armpits have been itching for like weeks.
You're allergic to my bullshit.
Oh. Okay. So, this one is called The Little Girl Who Lives in the Walls. It says, when my wife and I bought our first house, an old Victorian style built in the 50s, almost every night we heard what sounded like a kid's footsteps running down the upstairs hallway and other random sounds. My wife mentioned it to one of the neighbors, and they said it was probably just peacocks on the roof. Why would there be peacocks on the roof? Okay. The house backed up to a conservation area where wild peacocks lived, and they would occasionally get up on the rooftops. That answer made sense, so we basically got used to it and eventually ignored it. Less than a year later, our son was born, and when he was 1, he would balance all of his toys on top of other toys and made them spin. Literally found the center of balance of various toys and would walk in a circle around the room, giving each a gentle touch to keep it rotating. It was the weirdest and coolest thing I'd ever seen. When he was 2 or 3, we would hear him talking in his room at night, and one night I asked who he was talking to. He said, Tracy. I asked who Tracy was, and he says, the girl who lives in the wall. She's usually nice, but sometimes she scares me. He described a girl with brown hair and a yellow dress who would play with him sometimes and occasionally wake him up at night, but he didn't seem bothered by any of it, just startled sometimes. He would talk about her once in a while, but it wasn't a common occurrence. A couple years later, we had added on to the house and moved the master bedroom downstairs, switching the kids' rooms around. Our youngest was now in his old room and about ready to transition from crib to toddler bed. She'd always been a sound sleeper, but she cried almost every night in that room. Her first night in the toddler bed was... We heard a loud thud followed by screaming and rushed into the room, thinking she had fallen out of bed. She was on the other side of the room, got her calmed down, and back to bed. And happened again the next night. So we ended up switching the kids' room back, and they were fine. We looked up the history of the house, but didn't find anything about any missing little girls or anyone with the name Tracy that had lived there. Eventually, our son stopped talking about her, and a few years later, I ended up taking a job with another company, and we moved. The house was empty for a few months after we moved, and the neighbor across the street called my wife one day, said about a week after we left she thought she saw our daughter looking out the window, so she waved to her, and then she remembered we didn't live there anymore.
Ew.
Yeah. And that was by Ron Rule. Spooky.
This one is called Mrs. Black.
Oh.
My gran was in the local town doing her shopping and running various errands. On her way home, she met one of her neighbors out doing their gardening. She stopped, asked how they were. They had a chat, and Gran came home. When she, well, when she got in, my granddad asked how town had been, if she met anyone on the way. Gran started talking about the neighbor. Granddad interrupted her. Mrs. Black? We were at her funeral 2 weeks ago.
Oh.
Apparently, Gran nearly passed out when she realized.
Oh.
That was by Kaka Millis.
Oh my
That was
goodness.
also a short one.
It's okay. Short ones are better. This video is already 20 minutes long. Then here's my last one. I don't think you've read your 5 yet, so I think you have one more. This is called The Other Room. So this is one my dad told me when he and his brother were younger. They took a job to clean out some old lady's attic. The lady lived in a regular 1-story house with a normal attic space. The kind where you can't stand up fully. You have to stoop down and crawl everywhere. She had been hearing animals moving around and wanted some of her stuff pulled out of there before it got chewed up. For some reason, the attic only had one crawl space, and it was in the living room off to one side. So they pulled up a folding ladder, but put it underneath, and my uncle climbed up and pushed the door up. He popped his head through, and the attic, dimensions of space, be damned, was an exact replica of the living room underneath it. Oh. Complete with lighting and doorways leading to God knows where. My dad was standing underneath. Looking up, he could tell something wasn't right by the light and the way the roof looked too far up, like getting vertigo. My uncle closed the door, apologized to the lady, and they both took off. My dad said that his brother wouldn't talk to him until they were about a mile away. He just saw that look on his face, and when his brother said, "We've got to go," he didn't argue. That was by Monkey Boy. Wonder what they seen. Didn't really say. It just said there was an exact replica of the living room, so I don't really know if they seen a ghost or what. I think you have one more to go.
Yep. Another paramedic one.
Switching back and forth. I like it.
Got a call around 2 a.m. for an unknown medical, which is always a kind of uh-oh thing for us. As soon as we pulled up, all the cop had to say was, "Well, I don't even know." I walked up to a lady, unconscious, in front of her house that had her... in front of her house that had her face cut similar to the Joker and her throat slit. She was in her pajamas, no bag, no ID, no belongings at all outside. Her door was locked and there was a dog barking inside. All the lights were off. No one knew what the hell happened, and no one seemed to know any information about this lady. No name, no age, nothing. She was alive when we got to the hospital. I hope she's alright today, but I often wonder who did that to her and why.
Oh, snap. So, guys, that was our first video of the night. Hope you enjoyed our stories. Hope you enjoyed her. Let me know in the comments down below if you wish to see more of her, which, rather you want to or not, she'll probably be in more of my videos, so. But yeah, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll post more videos later. Bye, guys. That